This is your brain if you are a 3-star general in the United States Army. This is your brain if you are an 18-year-old recruit who has just joined the Army. Any questions? Okay, well, I have a question. What do you do if you are the largest military force in the free world and roughly 90% of the young people who join your organization every year are at a minimum casual gamers? The first thing you do is you form a study group study group goes out, thinks about the problem for a while, and their decision, their recommendation is to figure out a way to create a bridge with the entertainment industry so as to introduce and otherwise enleaven the computational simulation that is increasingly an important part of military training. Really sort of two issues here. One of them has to do with the cost and physicality of training. The other thing has to do with the nature of the U.S. military mission, particularly as it's been expressed in the last few years. There is a kind of a campaign mindset that has permeated the U.S. military's mission. What this has involved, what this has required, is a lot of face-to-face interaction, which frankly during the Cold War no one ever contemplated. The sorts of things that you see on CNN that are routinely part of nation building and stability and sustainment operations really requires a special kind of training and simulation to the extent that you can build simulations to teach that kind of thing become increasingly important. The result of this study then was more or less an explosion of creative visualization, interactive applications, really game-like interactive applications, and a large body of research at a place that up until recently I worked as the creative director, the Institute for Creative Technologies at the University of Southern California, a so-called UARC, a University Affiliated Research Center. That was the first acronym I learned when I was on the job. Now, at the heart of a lot of this kind of work, supporting this expeditionary mindset in the military and generally trying to solve some of these simulation training challenges, is the notion of immersion. And immersiveness, everybody has their own version of it. In works of fiction, in animation, there is a quest for truth over a quest for facts. The fact of the matter is that when we talk about immersion in simulation, we're usually looking for some distilled experience of the real world. So as Matilda McQuaid described the ICT's quest, our quest was to try to convey a sense of immediacy, immersiveness, and presence, what human factors researchers call presence. Well, one of the ways that you do this is with real-time photorealistic graphics. Now, it's not really all that challenging to make really looking realistic graphics. If you look at a high-end motion picture that has a big special effects budget, you will see things in there that are practically indistinguishable from reality. To do that in real time, rendered in a 3D space, is still challenging, but it is not the distant shore. It is something that technologically we are approaching asymptotically. Similarly, high-resolution directional audio. So it's just as, you hear my voice in this room, and it definitely doesn't sound like I'm coming over a telephone. It sounds like you really are in this place. Well, that the very complex nature of the directionality, all the reflections and the subtle changes in tonality that occur with sound in this space are part of this challenge. It becomes extremely difficult when there are multiple points of view that you have to synthesize through, well, one solution is called beamforming. Somebody once calculated that, for a dozen people sitting in a room like this doing real-time beamforming would require all of the computational power currently on planet Earth. The third thing, which is an interesting challenge and certainly is the focus of the what the National Design Museum has chosen to recognize in this exhibit, is the challenge of creating realistic avatars. And as my colleagues have already said this evening, the one thing that's really difficult to fool people about is another human being. We can spot a fake a mile off. There is so much by way of interaction before a single word is uttered that we know that we're not dealing with a real person. The requirements in creating a compelling and realistic virtual human are myriad. The virtual human has to have an awareness of where he is. They have to be able to locomote realistically. A spoken dialogue is an extremely challenging area. We tend to focus on speech recognition, whether it's, if you look at the past research and development efforts at like IBM or at Microsoft, that resulted in some really pretty good products that were not speaker dependent and had reasonably good accuracy. Once you actually know what someone has said, which is to say that you can produce a text file that accurately reflects what a person has uttered, you then have the challenge of understanding what that person means. If you and I meet on the street and I say, "What's up?" you won't then respond, "The sky and the planets." You'll know what's meant by that. Okay, if somebody smashes their shopping cart into you at Zabar's and you say, "What are you doing?" the correct answer is, "Well, I'm shopping." In addition to natural language understanding, there is then the question of generation and speech synthesis, which is sort of the same problem backwards. Add to this the need for modeling emotions, and what has been sort of most promising currently in the current approach that artificial intelligence researchers take is called appraisal theory, and what it amounts to is creating a model of an internal model of the virtual human's emotional state. So it's, in other words, that character has a view of the world and the way it should behave. If then the real world, the world outside the character, I should say, then differs. So there is tension between what the character believes the world should be and what's actually happening, then the character might be happy or sad or frustrated or angry. There is then the need to, once this emotional state is calculated, to express it. And finally, there is the problem of a realistic real-time procedural animation. It's extremely challenging. So in order to take a character, and no matter what a person chooses to do in the course of an interaction, that you can accurately model that in real time. A lot of this comes down to, on some level, to the question of what does it mean to have a mind. And one of the interesting conjectures currently is what does a mind actually do? Now, currently, although I've seen estimates as high as 10 to the 17th power, we're talking about somewhere between 100 trillion and 10 quadrillion floating point operations per second. So that's a really extremely high level of largely parallel computation. So by way of contrast, anybody in this room have a desktop computer? Right? Anybody? Some of you do. Okay, for the rest of you, it's a very handy object. You'll discover it soon. You can do email with it. So a desktop computer, this might be an exemplar of a desktop computer. It's a Pentium 4, 3 gigahertz. The current generation of Xbox, the Xbox 360, is about roughly 10 times as fast. So for that desktop processor, 12 billion floating point operations per second. Floating point just means there's a decimal point in it. Okay, so it's like basic arithmetical operation, a fundamental building block of computational systems. So now, what's the difference between bullet point 1 and bullet point 2? Well, bullet point 1, the human brain, you'd need roughly 1 million of those Pentium 4s if you could figure out a way to get them to work together to equal what's in one brain. Now, what would you need to power that? Well, this power plant in Stony Brook, Massachusetts, would power roughly that many Pentium processors. By contrast, and this really goes back to David's earlier discussion about how much power is required to do, compelling Frubber-based animation in real time. The human brain has a current consumption of between 15 and 20 watts. So it's you're talking about something that's extremely fast and extremely efficient. How long is it going to take us to get there? Okay, obviously everyone's heard of Moore's Law. There are all kinds of accelerating rates of technological advance in the computational domain. So how long will it take us to get there? Well, a lot of predictions run around 25 years. I think it's not outside the realm of possibility that it could come in as little as 10. So just like, Blue Gene can routinely defeat chess masters, I have to tell you that compared to synthesizing a human being, playing a game of chess is really pretty simple. So, building this computer, whether it's a decade or 25 years out, it's a ways out there. So what do we do today? Okay, how did we answer the mail today, and what are you going to see in the exhibit? And the answer is generally subsets. So the examples of the subsets would be a character who can respond to questions. So Sergeant Blackwell, if you go and interact with Blackwell in this exhibit, you'll see that he's a character. You pose a question, and he has the ability to respond to it. Okay. There is also the ability to use virtual humans for role playing. There is some very interesting work at ICT that went to the question of how would you conduct, is there a way to train people to conduct a negotiation? So we created a character who was like a Doctors Without Borders kind of fella, and you're in the role of a military officer who needs the doctor to move his clinic, and he's resistant to it. And so in that case, it's a character's emotional state of mind that really drives the conversation to a large extent. There is then the role of non-embodied virtual humans, and it's like, unless you've been like living under a rock for the last decade, you've undoubtedly dealt with non-embodied virtual humans. Because every time you call, you need an answer to something from your bank, you're going to deal with a non-embodied virtual human for a long time. Push this button and push that button and so on. Because there is such an immense computational load to fully model the human mind, and believe me, civil discourse does require a big chunk of your brain to be able to do all the things that go along with it. The thing that seems to work pretty well for the kind of question answering characters is called a classifier, which is basically a statistical based system that looks at your utterances. It's a natural language understanding type of process, and rather than a grammar based system, which is all those things that when you call the airlines and the banks, those are all grammar-based systems. You have to have very, very specific responses to very narrowly defined questions. If you've got a natural language type of system, it's going to, you can more or less free-form your questions, and the character will try to match up, will look for a sense of where in its domain of knowledge your query lands. So we tend to focus on these statistical based systems, these classifiers for this purpose. I did want to, before I conclude, thank the National Design Museum for recognizing ICT for really this, what's been a very fascinating ride personally. I also wanted to thank a member of the staff here, a bulwark of the research department in the library, without whom I would not be here tonight. I'm talking about my mother, in fact, who's in the audience, along with my father, my sister, and my brother-in-law, who not only braved the cold, but who have endured yet another 10 minutes of my hopeless blathering. So what I would now invite you to do is, when you go out and look at the exhibit, check out Sergeant Blackwell, who is he's a pretty interesting character, you know, remembering that he only has really about 1/1,000,000th of the brain capacity that's needed to make a real virtual human. And I thank you very much for your kind attention. Good night.